Tonight, we have 3 stories. From a mysterious room, some odd happenings at college, and a sinister story that takes place deep in the woods. This lineup is about as creepy as it gets. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. Stories can either be submitted at my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or my email that can be found in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Over the past week or so, I had been staying at my aunt's due to my recently reconnecting with her. I hadn't spoken to her in about 10 years prior before visiting. I'm 18. I don't have any memories of my aunt, but from what I can remember, she seemed to be kind. A little weird, but that never hurts anybody. She would always bring me random gifts whenever she visited. Things like a wooden toy car or a metal horse figurine. Easy to say as a kid I loved her. I was honestly devastated when her and my mother got into an argument. Serious enough for them to stop talking. My mom never would tell me what it was about, and I felt too awkward bringing it up around my aunt. Anyway, after I had messaged her on Facebook and we had arranged everything, I packed my bags with a few weeks worth of clothing and basic necessities like a toothbrush, toothpaste, and deodorant. I took a 2-hour train ride and even longer taxi trip, but I finally arrived. The second I stepped inside, I was greeted by my Aunt Lucy, and flooded with old memories I didn't even know I had. The atmosphere of this house was a warm one, that's for sure. Although I did feel a slight unease at random times for the first few hours. Like my bones would shoot out random warning signs or the occasional feeling of being watched. Like a spider on a web in the darkest corner of the house, it was hidden away plotting to crawl over me at night. I brushed it off as feeling slightly awkward, as I hadn't seen my aunt in so long. I look back at this now and cringe. My body's natural survival senses were pinging off the charts, and I chose to ignore them. I think a lot of people are guilty of this. I understand why I ignored, because 90% of the time when I get such feelings, they're usually inaccurate, but hindsight is a bitch. Lucy showed me around her house. It was pretty much unchanged from my childhood memories. She didn't have a spare room, so I would be sleeping on the sofa, which was fine with me. I've had my fair share of uncomfortable sofa nights. Sorry about the lack of a bed. I'm sure the sofa will suffice though. It's surprisingly comfortable. She laughed. Oh yeah, it's fine. I don't care. Where's your bathroom? I wasn't able to stop on the way here. I awkwardly muttered. It's upstairs, straight down the hall. There's one down here, but I need you to stay out of it, okay? The plumbing has gone haywire and I don't particularly fancy another flood of sewage. I made that mistake last time. She smiled. Something seemed off. Maybe she was embarrassed about having a blocked toilet. I'm not sure why she would be though. It's a pretty common occurrence. Thought to myself. I shrugged it off because I could feel myself looking into things too deep. I proceeded to use the upstairs bathroom and carry on with my day. Now that I was older, and I could have a conversation, I realized how cool and down-to-earth Lucy actually was. Which I am grateful for, as I was slightly worried I would get to her house and she would be stuck up or something. Luckily that wasn't the case. The first 2 days went by perfectly. Lucy had dug out what seemed to be an endless amount of old photographs. It was pretty interesting seeing her and my mom slowly grow up. They seemed really close back then. Crazy how time changes things. After a few hours of rummaging through photos, I realized how heavy my eyelids had become and decided it was probably time to go to sleep. After me and my aunt said goodnight to each other, and I tried my hardest to find a semi-comfortable spot on the sofa, I drifted off. I woke up at around 2 AM to a faint scratching sound. It sounded like it was coming from the ceiling directly above the bathroom. I listened to it for about 10 minutes, having no clue what it could be. Something trapped in the wall? No, couldn't be. It sounded further than directly above the bathroom. Was it in the attic? It had to be, as there weren't any rooms on the second floor that would be above the downstairs bathroom. I was too tired at this point to realize how that couldn't be possible. Something had to be above it. My mind swirled through thoughts of a random animal somehow making its way up there, trapped and eventually starving to death. Didn't seem like a fun way to die. The scratching was irregular at first, but quickly gained a steady rhythm. Too quick, then too slow. I tried to sleep through it, but it was very distracting. I decided I was going to go check just to ease my mind. I tiptoed up the stairs, trying to avoid as much sound as possible. The last thing I wanted to do was wake up Lucy. Once I reached the top, I tried to find the room above the downstairs bathroom. There wasn't one, only a wall. It didn't make any sense. What would be the reason to do this? Wouldn't there just be empty space behind it that could be used in some way? My aunt's house was old. It was passed down from her parents, but even so, I had never seen a house layout like this. The scratching was clearer now. It was definitely coming from behind the wall. I was pretty creeped out at this point, so I decided to head back downstairs to check out the bathroom. Bathroom door was locked. Shit. I didn't want to start digging through my aunt's things, but I also didn't want to wake her up like a child would when they have thrown up and needed their parents to change the bed sheets. I made my way into the kitchen and started opening up the drawers, silently digging around like a raccoon in the trash. It took 20 minutes. All while the thing above the bathroom was still scratching, but I finally found it. It was in a plastic container along with other random keys. It had a keyring with the words, "Downstairs bathroom" scribbled on it. How convenient. I stood at the bathroom door with the key, not sure if I wanted to open it. My stomach had a burning feeling and I was starting to feel sick. I had never had goosebumps as big as I had in that moment. It quickly occurred to me that I was scared, but of what? The second I turned the key, the scratching stopped. Whatever was in the hidden room above the bathroom knew I was there. I slowly swung open the door. I was immediately hit with an insanely cold draft and a strange smell, almost like dried meat. The bathroom was pitch black. If I had tried to wave my hand in front of my face, I'm sure I wouldn't have seen it. I turned around and started walking back to the coffee table next to the sofa where my phone laid. I left the bathroom door open when I did this, not wanting to have it open again and possibly have the creaking wake up Lucy. This was one of the biggest mistakes I have ever made. Once I grabbed my phone, I shone the flashlight into the darkness of the bathroom. It seemed ordinary except one bone-chilling feature. Right in the middle of the ceiling was the type of hatch that would usually lead to an attic, and it was completely open. My hair stood on edge as I looked into the latch from the safety of the bathroom doorway. The darkness was so immense not even my phone's flashlight could reach it. I quickly shut the door and locked it again. At that point, I had realized the scratching had stopped. Maybe the sound of the door opening scared whatever animal was hiding up there. I can remember thinking to myself. I returned to the sofa and laid down, wondering what it could have been. The sudden quietness of the house combined with my tiredness made the perfect recipe for falling asleep quickly, neglecting to think about why my aunt had hidden the key in the first place. I woke up at 9 a.m. on the dot. The sun was shining through the curtains, and I could smell the familiar scent of toast. I yawned and hopped out of bed, suddenly remembering the strange scratching sound from last night. I decided I was going to ask my aunt about it. "Good morning, sleepyhead. You want some toast? I was going to wake you up to see if you wanted some anyway," she asked. "No, I'm okay. Not hungry just yet. Hey, I wanted to ask you about the scratching last night. I'm not sure if you heard it, but it sounded like an animal or something was trapped." I told her through a yawn. "Oh yeah, don't worry about that. I'm going to call pest control after you go home. I don't want it to ruin your stay. Anyway, I think it's just bats or something," she nonchalantly said. "Oh, that might explain the smell when I opened the bathroom to check," I began to say. "Wait, you did what?" she asked, suddenly very alarmed. Sorry, I wasn't going to open it, but the scratching was loud. It sounded like it was coming from behind the wall above the bathroom," I tried to explain. Her face became ghost white. "Did you ever look away from the bathroom? Was the hatch open in any way? Even a little bit? Please, this is really important," she asked me, looking terrified. "Yeah, I left it open going to get my phone for a flashlight. The hatch was wide open. You didn't leave it like that. Are you okay, Lucy?" "I don't think a bat or anything got out. I would have hurt its wings. I'm really sorry. I just wanted to see what the scratching could be," I told her, now kinda scared myself. "Oh God." Lucy began repeating while going to the drawers where the bathroom key was located. She grabbed it with shaking hands, her face looking deathly. "What's going on? What was in there?" I begged her, She rushed to the door and took a deep breath before unlocking it. The second it opened, she nearly fainted, using the doorframe as support. I rushed over to her and helped her to the sofa. "What's wrong, Lucy? Please," I desperately asked her. "The twisty man. He's escaped. Oh God." She began to cry. "The twisty man? Who's the twisty man?" I asked her, beginning to feel deathly sick. She took a deep breath and began. "When I was a kid, a lot younger than you, about 10, I started to have nightmares. Nowadays, I think it would be called sleep paralysis, about a tall man made of darkness, with giant flat white circles with swirls on them as eyes, constantly turning, who would stand in the corner of my bedroom and watch me. My parents would always tell me it was just nightmares, but it felt too real. Something about him. I called him the twisty man. The way his lifeless swirls would stare into my eyes, that coldness that always seemed to surround him, the smell of old meat. Everything was wrong about him. Usually, when he stood in the corner of my room and terrorized my nights, I would be unable to move, unable to scream. One day, he decided he was bored with the corners. He started to move closer to me. That finally broke my silence and caused my dad to come rushing in, armed with a baseball bat. He saw the twisty man. He saw the thing. It wasn't in my head. It was real." She paused to cry for a few minutes. The creature was real. My dad hit whatever it was with the baseball bat, and suddenly I felt a blow against my back, knocking the wind out of me. My dad didn't notice though. He hit the twisty man's leg, and I felt mine crack. Somehow this thing was connected to me. I felt the pain it felt. I finally managed to scream out to my dad that he was hurting me. I told him I could feel whatever he was doing to the creature that now laid sprawled out on the floor, scratching it with its long bony finger. My dad came up with a solution to trap it. Keep whatever it was locked away. He didn't want to call the police, as they would either shoot the thing or send it to go get tested by the government. Either one would surely kill me. We trapped it behind the wall above the bathroom. "You opened the door," she told me, looking green. I sat in silence, trying to think of what to say when I heard it. The scratching sound. And it was right behind us. Today marks a year since I moved out of my university flat. Today is the first time in 365 days I feel strong enough, if strong is the right word, to talk about what happened in that place, in those days leading up to me moving out. I don't know why I'm writing this down. Maybe in the hope it will be therapeutic. Maybe in the hope of finding someone, anyone, who has experienced something like this. I don't know. But enough rambling. Let me set the scene. I was a university dropout, living with my boyfriend at his flat in southwest London and working as a teaching assistant in a rough and tumble but very lovely primary school. When an opportunity arose for me to go back into studying, teaching was my passion, my dream. I loved my job as a TA, but knew it wasn't going to quench the thirst in the long run. It was to my delight that I'd been accepted into one undergraduate education program, which led to qualified teacher status. My university was located across town, a long and expensive commute from the flat, so I decided to move into student halls during the week and go back to southwest London on weekends when I could. My boyfriend worked away a lot, so we were used to not seeing each other every day. They called it a village, essentially. A massive complex of student accommodation. I booked a studio flat, which looked nice enough on the photographs. Nothing special, of course, but fine for 5 days a week. On the Saturday I moved in, I couldn't help but feel a bit underwhelmed. I was 24 and had gotten used to living in a grown-up flat. This felt very 18-year-old student-y. From the first day, the vibes weren't great. When I checked in, they hadn't actually assigned me a room yet, despite me having paid a hefty deposit and booking fee well in advance. Then I was shown the wrong room by a new member of staff which didn't know the layout of the complex. When I was finally shown to the right room, it was down a dark, windowless ground floor corridor that felt odd. I don't know, eerie? Whereas the rest of the complex had been brimming with life and laughter as students moved in, excited for a new adventure. This little corner felt oddly short of that buzz. It unsettled me. It made me feel uncomfortable, uneasy. Still, I brushed it off as me feeling tired and a little frustrated at the lack of organization. I was left alone, waiting for my boyfriend to turn up with a car full of IKEA purchases and a couple of suitcases of clothes, and went about setting up the complimentary Wi-Fi. No surprises. The signal was so poor that it was more effective for me to just hotspot my phone data. Later on, when I went to take a shower, I found the shower head so full of limescale that the water was barely coming out. Almost in tears at this point, I phoned my mom to vent as my poor boyfriend battled with the weird oven that looked like a microwave to try and cook a pizza. The next day, I woke up alone in the studio flat I didn't have much love for. I got out of bed, washed and brushed my teeth, then set about getting dressed, intending to check out my new local church. As I pulled on my jeans, a weird mood seemed to come over me, almost like a cloud, before settling in what felt like the pit of my soul. A sadness, a strangeness, a sense of foreboding. It felt familiar. I quickly realized it was the sickly sort of uneasiness I'd felt the day before when moving in. I paused for a second, which turned into a minute, and before I knew it, I'd stripped off my jeans and gotten back into my pajamas. For whatever reason, I just couldn't face church. It was like there was a barrier, something that wanted to keep me away. Again, putting it down to general anxiety about all the changes happening around me, I indulged in a little Netflix before having brunch and finishing the mammoth task of unpacking and organizing my room. Sometime in the late afternoon, my fire alarm started shrieking. It was a loud, piercing sound, one that seemed to physically injure my entire body. After about a minute, my alarm mercifully stopped ringing, but I could hear my next-door neighbor's alarm still going off through the thin walls. Soon, the sound of a security person could be heard knocking on her door. "Hold on a second," I heard a female voice shout. Apparently unable to hear her, security knocked 2 more times. Sighing to myself, I opened my door and asked him to wait a moment, just as he was sliding the master key into the lock. Seconds later, a girl slightly younger than me appeared, wearing only a bath towel. Apparently she'd been showering and had left the en suite door ajar, causing steam to flood into her living space and trigger the alarm. The security guy switched off her alarm and went on his way. Quite clearly embarrassed, she thanked me for stalling him. We had a brief conversation, where we exchanged vague details about our course. She was a singer, studying music. After this we parted ways, and it was only once I was back inside my room that I realized I hadn't actually learned her name, nor she mine. This would be the only conversation we ever had. I found myself gritting and grinding my teeth more and more over the next few days. I was sleeping badly at night, feeling unsettled and anxious, plagued by nightmares. I'd see mainly blackness, but there'd be a girl somewhere, unseen, crying. I knew she needed help, but I couldn't help her. I'd be panicking, running around, realizing time was running out for her. Every couple of hours I'd wake up with a jolt, convinced someone was in my room. Then I'd be lying awake, waiting to fall back asleep, and my eyes would play tricks on me. The doors of my wardrobe would seemingly open, almost too slowly to be detectable, but when I blinked, would be closed again, and there'd be a faint sound, like someone softly crying, but I was still half asleep. I was probably hearing the echoes of my dreams. Adding to my overall discomfort was that I'd seemingly been placed in a block made up entirely of music students. On one side of me was a violinist, and on the other was a singer. To make matters worse, on the other side of my window was a pub, which seemed to attract boisterous punters from the mid-afternoon to the early hours of the morning. Trying to get through my seemingly endless list of reading materials felt like an impossible task with the noise pollution all around me. By the end of the week, my mood was a foul one. My course was more intense than I could have imagined. I felt sick and achy from lack of sleep, and every time I entered my building and walked down the corridor to my flat, I felt that weird, uneasy feeling again. It also seemed to crop up whenever I tried to leave the flat as well. My boyfriend was away that weekend, and feeling too lazy to wrestle tubes and trains and buses, I decided to stay in my studio flat and try to get some work done. To my surprise and satisfaction, I found myself immersed in silence on that Saturday. Both the violinist and singer appeared to have gone out. I cracked on with my reading until the late afternoon when I headed out to have a coffee with a couple of course mates. When the singer didn't return on Saturday night, I presumed she must have gone home. Though I did find it weird that she would leave for the weekend only a week into the semester. I went to bed early on Saturday night and tried to persuade the uneasiness to subside in the hopes I would get a decent night's rest ahead of church. I had the worst nightmare of the week that night. I dreamed that someone was chanting in the singer's flat. Though I couldn't work out what language it was in, everything felt cold and the air felt heavy. Someone was scratching at the walls in the singer's flat and screaming as the chanting got louder and louder. I woke up in the pitch blackness, sweat dripping from my face, to the sound of my fire alarm going off. I swore aloud, irritation burning in my chest as my head pounded. After a moment it stopped, but somewhere in the building, someone else's was still ringing. It took me a moment to realize the noise was coming from the singer's flat. She must have had a faulty alarm, I figured. It took a while for the maintenance man to come and turn it off. When he'd done so, I rested my head back down on my pillow and closed my eyes, willing myself back to sleep. Barely 20 minutes had passed when my alarm began to blare out again in all its shrillness. It stopped, though the singer's alarm continued to wail into the night. Now extremely agitated, I phoned reception and asked for someone to come and sort it as soon as possible. They responded quickly and I tried again to go back to sleep. A few moments later, my alarm went off for the third time. For fuck's sake, I roared. I tore my phone from its charger and opened my Uber app. Booking a ride before pulling on some leggings and throwing on a sweatshirt, I grabbed my bag and keys and marched out of my studio, down the creepy corridor, out of the gates into the meeting point for my car. 50 minutes and an eye-watering fare later, I was home. There I managed another few hours of sleep before dragging myself up and, determinedly, to church. Everything felt different, felt disconnected. I couldn't really focus. Even so, I left with a sense of lightness that seemed to evaporate some of the heaviness. I felt stronger, physically and mentally. I felt oddly prepared to go back to the complex, however much I didn't want to. I did go back. Arriving late on Sunday night, I could hear the violinist was listening to music, but the singer's studio was silent. Not particularly concerned, I went about fixing some food and streaming a film, before sliding into bed and falling asleep relatively easily. It was 3 a.m. when the alarm went off. After a minute, as usual, it stopped, and the only noise left disturbing the peace was that of the singer's alarm singing away. Spitting teeth and blood and bone at this point, I phoned reception and demanded that someone come and turn it off. The rest of the night passed on eventfully, and somehow I managed something of a peaceful sleep. At 7 o'clock, I was awoken by an alarm I'd actually set, and stumbled out of bed to get ready for my day. It was full of back-to-back lectures and classes, including one about space and how to inhabit space. In something reminiscent of my previous drama student days, I left the class covered in bruises and friction burns from rolling around on the floor. That evening, I didn't hear the singer singing, or making dinner, or watching television. Her room seemed to be empty still. I began to wonder if she had dropped out. At around midnight, I went to bed. A few hours later, I was once again rudely awakened by the fire alarm going off. It stopped and the singer's alarm continued. I heard a few doors open in the hallway, along with the grumbling of bitter voices. I put on my dressing gown and went out to join the horde of angry residents. Feeling it was my responsibility as her next-door neighbor, I decided to knock on the singer's door to double-check she wasn't inside. I approached her door, realizing as I did that my entire being was filled with dread. It had come upon me so suddenly it took me by surprise. It was as though I was coming face to face with the source of all the uneasiness and eeriness that plagued the corridor. Like the terrible vibes were radiating from this room. I felt too scared to knock on the door, aware of the eyes of those around me. I felt foolish, but not enough to brave whatever could be inside. I snapped out of it as I took a step back. There was nothing inside. Of course there wasn't. There couldn't be. The room was empty. The singer was with her parents. The alarm was faulty. This wasn't a ghost story. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see the security guy walking down the corridor. He looked around us all nervously, as if he could sense the danger of a stampede ensuing. rather anticlimactically. He entered the flat, switched off the alarm, and came back into the corridor and locked her door behind him. "This is taking the piss, mate," someone shouted. "Every time her alarm goes off, so do ours." "She's not even in there," the security man said, wearing a puzzled look. "She hasn't been for a couple days," I informed him. He furrowed his brow, then shrugged his shoulders. "Later on today, I'll have someone come out and check the alarm. I can't see anything wrong with it, so it must be the wiring." Then to me, more quietly, he said, "When she gets back, tell her to empty her bin, would you? It stinks in there." With that, he left. One by one, we each turned in, consoled by the promise of the alarm being fixed. A few days went by. Every night, we were put through the same ordeal. In the end, the violinist knocked on my door and kindly offered me some earplugs he'd purchased at one of the cheap shops on the high street. By Friday, I found myself at breaking points again. Even with earplugs in, it was almost impossible to sleep. It wasn't just the noise making it hard. Things kept on happening. I tried to convince myself it was just my exhausted brain playing tricks on me. One night, before I'd even gone to sleep, I realized I was freezing cold. I turned my head to see that my curtains were blowing in the wind. Opening them, I saw that my window was wide open. There was no way someone could have pulled it open from its locked state from outside. I was certain I'd not opened it, but what was certainty? I felt doubtful of my perception, my observations, my own mind. Each time the fire alarms went off in their nightly routine and I went back to sleep, I woke up doubting whether it had actually happened, or how many times it had happened, or whether I'd imagined it. Felt like I was going crazy on the Tuesday afternoon, when I returned from class to find all the lights on in my flat, knowing there was no way I'd have turned them on in the first place, let alone forgotten to turn them off again before leaving. Felt like I was going crazy on the Wednesday morning, when I turned my back on the kitchen counter for less than a second before my coffee mug inexplicably slid off and crashed to the floor. Felt like I was crazy on the Thursday evening, as I made notes on the article in front of me, distracted by what sounded like faint chanting, the same kind as I'd heard in my dream. Only this time it wasn't next door. This time it almost sounded like it was in my room. Somehow, impossibly so, but when I stopped to intentionally listen, I could hear nothing. So even though this dreary Friday night, I was tense and emotional and, though I hated to admit it, scared, I was grateful for the weekend. My boyfriend texted me to let me know he was outside the complex, and I darted out with my bag and phone in tow. It took an age to head west, stuck in commuter traffic, but I didn't mind. He was here, and I was not there, and I felt safe for the first time in almost a week. I spent the weekend socializing, drinking, eating, doing all I could to put the nightmare of my week to the back of my mind. On Sunday night, we drove back to the halls. My boyfriend offered to stay with me. Everything within me wanted to say yes, but in truth I was too scared. Scared that whatever was haunting me might do the same to him. He was too good, too precious, to be afflicted as I was. So I begrudgingly kissed him and sent him home. The air was thick with something unsavory as I pressed my fob into the electronic lock and entered my building. The disquiet of the silence felt tangible, touchable almost. Fear was in my head, not in my feet, and I found myself being led by my feet to my door, which I hastily unlocked and stepped through into my flat. I hadn't been there 5 minutes when there was a loud knock on the door. I cautiously answered it to the security man I'd seen a few days previously, along with the building manager. They asked if I'd seen or heard from the singer. I replied that I hadn't. They explained that she'd failed to attend any classes that week, so her family has been contacted. They also hadn't seen her. The building manager had barely finished the final sentence of his explanation when the piercing sound of the fire alarms ringing startled us all. We looked between each other, then towards the door of the singer's room. The security guy opened it. My hands instinctively shot up to cover my mouth and nose as the door was opened. The stench was sickening. I had never experienced the smell before, but somehow I instantly recognized it. I gingerly followed the two staff members into the room, goosebumps breaking out along every inch of my body. The en suite door was open, and the bathroom inside was clean and undisturbed. The kitchen the same. The security guy was staring at the wardrobe. I swallowed. A wave of disgust swept over me. What if the singer had been keeping a hamster or other small rodents in her closet, which had died due to lack of food? That must be what the smell was. Looking apprehensive, as though he'd had the same thought, the security man slowly opened the door. Blood-curdling, awful scream pierced the air. I didn't even realize it came from me at first. I didn't know I was capable of making a noise as terrible as that. I ran as fast as I could out from the room, my legs buckling and causing me to collapse into the arms of two strangers who had hurried out into the corridor to see what was happening. Sobbing and shaking, I didn't care who those strangers were, just that they were here and alive and present. The crowd was beginning to gather. The security guy and the building manager came out, slamming the singer's door closed behind them. The security guy's hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped his keys. "Everyone back in their rooms," he said hoarsely. He pointed to me. "Come with me. You two, come too. Catch her if she faints." It was an odd procession that hurried back to the manager's office. The security guard, still shaking and looking as though he may vomit. Me, the quivering, crying wreck. The two bewildered students supporting my body. The pale-faced, dazed-looking manager bringing up the rear. At the reception, the security guard whispered something to the person on the desk, who stared at him in horror, before snapping back into action and picking up the phone. The police arrived not long after. They took statements and called in a forensic team, and a psychologist for those of us who had witnessed the scene. The rest of the night and the next few days passed in a blur. I left as soon as the police dismissed me. My boyfriend and a few of our friends packed up my stuff and brought it back to our flat. The coroner opened an inquiry. There wasn't much enlightenment to be had. The singer's body had been found in her closet in a locked room, with her keys on her desk. CCTV footage showed no one but the security guard entering and exiting the flat, and he was only there for moments at a time to switch off the fire alarm. There were no obvious wounds on her body, no trace of poison or drugs in her stomach or blood. The only thing of any note that the autopsy found was plaster under her nails, which aligned with scratch marks on her wool. It was as though she'd struggled, but against who or what, nobody could say. She died inexplicably, but undoubtedly very frightened. Selfishly, the scariest part of the story for me is not what happened, but what could have happened next. Maybe whatever it was that got her, the thing that was chanting in her room, and then in mine, was coming for me too. Maybe I'd have met the same fate had I stayed. I felt guilty for a while, wondering if I'd been more proactive in reporting her missing, she'd have been found quicker, and it might have been more comforting for the family. I also, to this day, feel deeply shameful that I was relieved when she first disappeared, that I was grateful for the peace and quiet. I don't know why it was her. I know that the thing, whatever it was, didn't want me to go to church, and that I was fortified when I did. This isn't a ghost story. This is something evil, something inhuman, something still out there. I don't know what it is, nor do I care to find out. I just hope it never finds me. Even after all these years, I can still remember the way it smelled, the way it behaved. It was an abomination. I can feel my own life waning, and I need to tell my story. It was almost 60 years ago, right around this time of year in the very late summer. The fall winds had swept down from the north and the leaves had already begun to turn into swirling reds, dancing oranges, and vibrant yellows. The air was crisp and cool, and to us, all of that meant hunting season. To anyone who grew up in the country like me, you'd understand the excitement and thirst for the season, whether it was taking down big game or just going on hunting trips with your father or friends, trekking across the countryside and camping under the stars. It is a fleeting experience, and I am not writing this to scare anyone away from it. Well, the many live in their cushy little apartments and dwell in their industrial palaces. Those of us in the wild understand that our lifestyles are very different. I don't expect any of you, especially those of you who have hardly dipped their toes into the country, to believe me. But if you've read this far, I hope you continue. For all you know, this might just save your life. The family ranch, which I still live in to this very day with my children and grandchildren, is in Wyoming, somewhat close to Great Falls if anyone's been there. Growing up, my father, grandfather, uncles, and their friends would often share stories of their adventures on the hunt. I'll admit, it definitely was great to grow up with them. Once I'd started entering adulthood, my grandfather was getting older and mostly stuck close to the ranch with grandma, but my father would still occasionally go out on hunts with me. Once I was old enough, I would go out with just my friends sometimes. One of my best friends growing up was Bud. Bud was 19 with long, shaggy brown hair, stubble, and a little bit of a beer gut. There was also my younger brother, Don, but we just called him Donnie. He was 17, lean, and had wits shrewder than my own. One day, Bud and I decided that we'd go on an extended hunt in Yellowstone. Times were different back then, and you could do much more than today. There were no cell phones or internet back then. We only had each other to rely on. Donnie insisted on bringing along his girlfriend, Elle, to which we obliged, so long as she didn't get in the way. He always had a way with women that I lacked, but most of the ones he brought home were clingy, and more of the girly type, which is why I was surprised to see that, on the day of our departure, Elle was donned in full hunting attire, her earthy brown hair pulled back, and a large spear in her hand. Donnie had a rifle slung over his shoulder, smiling as he saw my reaction. "Good to see y'all," said Bud. "You too, Tim," he said to me, shaking my hand. "I'm Elle." She shook our hands. "Donnie told me so much about you all." I smiled. She was a country girl, that was for sure, but she spoke and carried herself highly sophisticated. I wondered how my brother managed to score a girl like her. She seemed nothing like the others, but looked the same. His beer gut was growing ever so slightly every time I saw him, but had his 12 gauge along with a rifle like Donnie. We loaded up our tents and our supplies into the back of Bud's rusty old pickup truck that he still had from his 16th birthday, and we sped off. Most of the drive was uneventful. We caught up on our lives and shared stories, as well as having periods of silence. By the time we'd arrived at the border of the park, it was the late afternoon. We slowed down to pass by the ranger station, and the young ranger let us through. It was many more miles until we reached a large parking lot area, which was mostly empty aside from a few scattered trucks. Though, upon closer inspection, their dashboards were very dusty, and their hoods had some bird droppings on them. "Sweet," shouted Bud as he pulled into the lot. "I've never seen this place so deserted. My pa and I used to go here every couple of years, all the way from Great Falls. Bud lived closer to the town than we did. It was less frequented, but damn, we'll have the whole forest to ourselves." We unpacked the truck and began to haul our supplies off the back of the truck. It would be a heavy load, but well worth it. We were startled to find someone up behind us. "You there," the man behind us said in the raspy voice of a lifelong smoker. Behind me, I found a very tall, older-looking man with graying hair and a short beard. His skin was leathery and had clearly seen much of the sun in its day. He was leaning over a smooth, wooden walking stick. I jumped back, causing him to chuckle. "I didn't mean to startle you guys. I just wanted to ask if you were all going out into the green." "Yeah, why?" said Elle, chewing on a stick of jerky. He smiled, revealing his crooked, pointy teeth, most of which were yellowing. He wore an old military jacket and a dirty white t-shirt underneath. "I've been hearing some strange rumors of people going missing in these woods at night. People go into the forest, and they never come out," he said with a very serious look. "People just like you all. Just look at this parking lot. It's desolate. Now I've been a ranger here for decades, and have never heard anything like that before. Anyway, I feel as though I am obligated to accompany y'all. I promise I won't get in the way. And I know my wife would feel a lot more comfortable if I was with someone else. They sure as hell don't pay me enough for this." He chuckled. I wasn't sure what to think. Everyone else had unsure glances, but eventually, Bud stepped forward and shook his hand, breaking the silence at last. "The name's Bud. And you are?" "Virgil," he said with a pleasant smile. Everyone else still looked a bit unnerved. He laughed. "I didn't mean to scare y'all. I've been ranging here for many years, and I ain't never seen any of this shit. Probably just those Devious little brats trying to scare people. It's bad for business, you know? Everyone else introduced themselves, and Virgil seemed kind enough on the walk-in. I hoped that he wouldn't get in the way, or make us follow some weird rules, as was typical of the Rangers when they showed up. We just made it to the edge of the forest pathway, when I noticed that Virgil didn't have anything aside from his long, wooden walking stick and a small, leather satchel. I couldn't help but comment. No tools or weapons? No, sir. All I need is my trusty walking stick. I found this around, 18 or so years ago. This very same night, I was attacked by one of those damn mountain lions. Damn thing would have torn my whole arm off had I not had this. He showed me some deep scratches and claw marks on the wood. Crazy old man, thought to myself with a chuckle. One of these days, he's gonna wish he had a machete or a hatchet. After a couple hours of walking, the sun was finally starting to set. So we set up camp in a nice clearing at the edge of a forest and a field. With Virgil's help, we had a roaring fire going in no time, and it was warm. The chilly, night air was abated, creating a warm bubble of safety around the camp. We'd not found any game to pursue, so we just opened up our tins and roasted up some beef on some cast iron skillets above the fire. There was a certain charm to cooking naturally, that we all knew. We all gathered around the fire closely as the night pressed in. So Virgil, how often do you go out ranging here? Said Elle, taking a bite of her crispy steak bits. He hearkened for a moment, glancing upward. Oh, it's every couple of months. It used to be more when I was younger, but these old bones don't work quite like they used to. Plus my missus gets all angry when I'm away too long. How about you kids? Come here often? I don't reckon I've seen y'all before. Oh no, said Donnie. This is our first time out in Yellowstone. Except for Bud. He's been here a few times. Yeah, me and my pa used to come up here every few years. But he's getting old now, said Bud. Old? Can't be as old as me, Virgil said with a chuckle, taking a bite from his crispy steak bits and wiping his beard and mouth off with his sleeve. Well, I'm glad to see someone else coming up here. We get so few these days. You think it's the rumors? I said. Could be, but then again, most people just go to the prettier areas. Not much around here except for forests and fields. Still, the game is good. I expect tomorrow we'll have a lot of goodies. That's my favorite part about being here. Hell, that's why I've stuck around so much. Maybe I'll bring something back for the missus. Usually, I bring her back a keepsake. Where are you from again? Oh, I'm from Great Falls in Montana, you know? I was elated when he said that. You're from Great Falls too? I said with glee. Yeah, lovely place. Grew up there. Wow, I can't believe I've never seen you before. Do you go to the bar on Old Street too? No, I usually go to the other one. Oh, you must mean the one near the museum. Yeah, that's the one. The wife doesn't like my late nights there, but she yammers on constantly. Wow, it's so cool to meet someone else from Great Falls, said Bud. We exchanged stories around the fire, and I actually felt surprised. Virgil didn't seem like such a stranger anymore, and I don't think anyone else was uncomfortable with him joining the group. We slept well, and when we woke up, Virgil was just returning to camp. Good morning, y'all, he said with a smile. Wakey wakey, you guys overslept. He threw a freshly killed squirrel on the ground. The game is great today. He washed his hands off with a flask of water, wiping some blood off. Maybe you just wake up too early, said Elle, crawling out of her and Donnie's tent. A dazed Donnie, waking up behind her. I crawled out to meet a nice, dew-covered morning. The air was fresh and I could tell the day would be fair. Alright, so I'm thinking we can split up to cover more ground, said Virgil. The 5 of us would just make a ruckus. I want to go with Virgil, I shouted. No fair, said Bud. Fine, I'll go with him tomorrow. Virgil just smiled and grabbed that walking stick of his, but handed Donnie the 12 gauge and then took his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. Elle took her spear and her rifle as well, and the 3 of them branched off. On the way out, we waved goodbye to the rest of the party and headed off into the forest, while the others went off into the field. I must have made quite the impression on you all. I'm honored, said Virgil. His eyes peered at me as he walked with his stick, the leaves crunching beneath our feet as we advanced. He ran his fingers through his dusty hair and continued walking. I'm just glad to meet someone else from Great Falls. What an amazing coincidence. You should come back home with us. You'd love my ranch. Wouldn't that be nice? I'd love to meet your father and whoever else lives there. It'd really be an honor to meet other people living there. Do you have any family in Great Falls? I said innocently. He peered at me with sad eyes before turning to face sternly ahead. I did. They were all wiped out in the war. That's why I came out here. To keep to myself mostly, aside from the missus. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring back memories that I'm sure are painful for you. It's alright. It was a long time ago, and I never get along with my father much. But the rest was a great loss. My father fought in the war. Maybe you knew him, I said with a smile. It'd be such an honor to meet another veteran. I haven't seen any in so long. Oh, look. The mood suddenly shifted as he gestured to a hare. I pulled out my rifle and handed it to him, figuring he'd want to take the shot. No, that's alright. I've never been much good with a gun. He handed it back to me. Odd, I thought, as he was a ranger. I scoped the hare out, and within the next few seconds, we had a fresh kill. Bullseye, he said with a clap. You know, Tim, I wasn't sure about you guys at first, but you've truly shown me what great people you are. I've not trusted the youngsters as of late, rumors and all, but you've proven to me how resourceful you are. Tonight, I want to show you some of my ranging techniques so that you can carry them on when I'm gone, since I have no living sons or relatives anymore. Of course, absolutely. It'd be such an honor to learn from you. You must know so much, I said excitedly. To think that this master ranger would be showing me some of his tips would just be fascinating. He smiled and we continued on. We'd gathered quite a lot of animals during the day, and it was starting to get dark again. I told Virgil that we'd better start heading back, as we were very deep in the forest now, and this was unfamiliar territory, for me at least. He agreed, and we began to head back. It wasn't until maybe an hour later when I noticed we weren't getting closer to camp. In fact, we seemed to be getting further away. I could only tell when the sun was setting, and it was in the wrong direction. I opened my mouth to speak, but stopped once I realized Virgil was leading the way. That's odd. Why would he be leading me deeper into the forest? Virgil, are you sure we're going the right way? I asked with a faint tremble in my voice. He stopped dead in his tracks. We can't go back to camp. Not yet. I need to show you something. Virgil, come on. This isn't cool. I don't want to be in the forest at night, especially when people have been disappearing around here. You said it yourself. Oh, Tim, please, he said mockingly. We're two master rangers in our natural territory. I honestly don't think we have anything to worry about. Maybe you're right, I said, continuing to follow him. It was soon very dark and I could no longer see anything, but still, Virgil continued onward, until at last, we reached a small clearing in the forest. The moonlight illuminated the area. There was a cold wind and a very strong feeling of disquiet in the air. Dread was in the forest all around us, and I could feel my heart begin to pound. Don't be afraid, he said with a smile, standing in the center of the clearing. The forest around us was deathly quiet, and I could hear no animals or even bugs chirping. It was too silent. In the light, his skin looked extremely pale, and his face very gaunt. His eyes were cold and emotionless. I was frozen, absolutely paralyzed. His veins grew tense and popped out as he inhaled heavily. I feel so alive, he said. Virgil stood there motionless. The wind blew even stronger, and this time there was a horrible, rotting stench. It smelled like numerous dead carcasses, but almost worse. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find my voice. Eventually, I fell to my knees and retched up my stomach. He just stood there, basking in the moonlight, and then he spoke, and his voice was as terrible as the night itself. It was like a sick animal trying to poorly imitate human speech. He sounded disfigured. This wasn't the kind old man who I'd been with all day. This was someone else. He spat up a bit of bile. Do you smell that? He said with a little chuckle. Yeah, it's hard to miss. This is where I do it, and those are the others, he said. I was very confused, but I didn't like what I was hearing all the same. Do what? He then turned to face me, and his stare was cold and emotionless. The moon shone through the clouds briefly, illuminating what was numerous dead carcasses and bones of disfigured and mangled creatures scattered all around the clearing, forming a circle of bones. I knew I felt a crunch on the walk in, but I thought it to be a twig. Is it possible that was something else? I thought to myself. It was sickening. A lone owl hooted from somewhere in the forest, but everything else was still silent. Back during the war, we were landing in Okinawa. My boyhood friends were blown to bits and pieces. Some burned. I can still hear their screams. The same could be said about those dogs we were fighting. They bled like the rest of us. I was one of the ones who were carried off in chains to a prison camp, along with my squadron. Where are you going with this? Weeks and months went by. We knew the war would end soon, but we didn't know how soon. Many of my friends dropped dead from disease, famine, or just couldn't live with it anymore. Sometimes they'd have us do long marches, where we walked from camp to camp. If you fell out of line, they'd put a bullet in your head and keep walking. Or maybe they'd just stick a sword in your throat and call it a day. The stench was unbearable at first, but soon I grew accustomed to it. I'm sorry. That must have been horrible. It was. The younger ones were the first to go. Their bodies just couldn't handle it. Those damn dogs killed without a second thought. Then came the diseases, and worst of all, the famine. We were starving and there was no other way. The war coming to an end soon was enough to fuel us till the end. But we were starving. When I saw some of the diseased, lying peacefully in their cots before the enemy dogs collected their bodies to be incinerated or whatever they did, I did what I did, and what I had to do. Have you ever tasted human flesh? I found my strength and rose to my feet. It's you, I said sternly, clutching my stomach. You're the one who was making people disappear in the forest. When I said that, he stared me down, his eyes looking even more ruthless than before. I need to eat. I've been hungry for too long. Travelers seldom come here, and I am really hungry. I wasn't always like this, but once I tasted my first bite, I realized how invigorating it was. You'd understand if you tried it too. It allows me to do incredible things and makes me strong. Got me out of that wretched prison. The others scorned and hated me, but I'd never felt more alive. Eventually, my deeds were forgotten and so was I, but I just couldn't stop. Who are you? I shouted, realizing I might become this sicko's next meal. The thought of my guts sloshing around and digesting in his stomach made me feel beyond sick. My name is Virgil, and my story was true. But for the rest of it, I lied to you. I'm not really from your wretched little town. The forest is my home, and the sky my shelter. I heard your friend, the fat one, mention a name as you pulled in. I needed you guys to trust me, and trust me you did. How could you? We trusted you. I thought you thought of me like a son. I've known you for the better part of a day. And you don't know me, and I don't know you. How many others have been here? Lots. Too many to count. But you're the first one who's made it this far. I'll admit, I did enjoy telling my story to someone who listened. It does get awfully lonely out here. I was almost considering sparing you. Think about it. If we worked together, there's nothing we couldn't do. He pleaded. In hindsight, I should have played along with his game. But at the moment I simply grew enraged. No, I won't let you keep terrorizing innocent hikers, I shouted. I had such high hopes, he said with feigned sadness. This thing had no remorse. He didn't care if I lived or died. So be it. Because I kind of like you, I plan on giving you a quick death. So long as you don't try and struggle, let go. Make it easier for me. No, I shouted ferociously. Leave us alone, please, I begged. Virgil started laughing. He popped open his wooden walking stick to reveal a hidden, long blade. I tried to jump back, but he was faster, and his blade was long. With one swift strike, he lacerated my shoulder. My veins and muscles popped and bled as I collapsed into one knee. I screamed in aggravation. I reached for my rifle. The pain was overwhelming, but Virgil was still faster. I barely managed to pull it out and fire a shot before he slapped it away. I turned to run, but I felt a slapping sting in my back before the ground rushed up to meet me. I managed to roll over, and I saw Virgil standing over me. He looked grotesquely tall, towering over me. Please, relax. I've done this many times with many different groups of people. You can fight, as many others have tried to. Better men and women than you. But I'm stronger than you. I'm faster than you. I can see you in the darkness. And I can smell you. Now more than ever with that wound. Flesh makes me strong. So very strong. Let it go. And let it happen. You have no choice. Your best hope now is that you go quickly. But I cannot let you warn the others. Tainted meat is no good. When the prey sees the knife, it ruins the meat. The first kill is always the toughest. I started kicking and fighting, trying to get him off me, but he had me completely pinned. What would your wife think of this? I shouted, trying to appeal to any sense of mercy or reasoning he had, but he simply laughed. My wife? Oh, Tim, no. I haven't had a wife in 20 years. Not since I butchered her, too. She never was the same after the war, anyhow. First, I cut off her hands and feet, just like I'm going to do to you. I'm going to chop them off, but if you're lucky, I'll cut your throat first so that you don't have to suffer. At least she went quickly. The poor woman had no fight left in her, but I like a nice little fight, so I don't think I'll let you go off the hook that easily. No more quick death for you, he said with a little chuckle. He dragged me by my feet back into the circle. With his sharp blade, he began to saw at my hands and feet. I could now see his smile fully, and his teeth were even sharper than I remember them being. They were jagged, crooked, and yellowing. Did he file them into points? I thought in horror. Once I kill you, the rest will come looking for you, he said with a disgusting laugh. Just as he broke my skin, he halted and gasped. The wind being knocked out of him, Virgil twisted around, his spine crackling as he did. I saw a hatchet sticking partially up his upper back, which I promptly yanked out. He screamed a sound so horrible that I was sure my ears would bleed. Bud was standing behind him with his rifle. I heard the gunshot and I was nearby. He shouted, "Get off of him." "That won't save you," said Virgil. He charged at Bud. A single bullet pierced his thick, leathery skin, tearing off a piece of his shoulder, but it didn't even seem to faze him. Virgil was in bloodlust and thirsty for a taste. He was soon on him. He tore into Bud's flesh, ripping his tendons apart, eating his flesh and drinking his blood. I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran. The pain on my shoulder and back were blindingly terrible, but I ran and ran and ran. I swear I heard Virgil's footsteps behind me. Whatever it was certainly faster than me. Back at camp, Elle and Donnie were stunned to see me all bloody. "Oh my goodness, what happened?" she shouted. "Donnie, get the first aid kit." "And where the hell are Virgil and Bud?" "Bud? He's dead," said a voice coming from the forest. It was Virgil. I heard the gunshots. Came as quickly as I could. Sure enough, Virgil stood over there, putting up a worried facade. His neck and clothes were still drenched in blood, and he reeked of death. I tried to help him, but he was already bleeding out badly by the time I got to him. I think he got into a fight with Tim or something. I tried to stop him, but Tim bolted away from me. "No, that's not true," I shouted, but I knew that his story was perfectly believable. He was calm and collected. His word was impeccable, and it was as if he'd known exactly what to say to turn the last of the group against me. It also didn't help that I was holding a bloody hatchet in my hand. I got a dirty look from Elle, and a horrified look from Donnie. They patched up my shoulder and Virgil's too, along with his back, before bringing my hands and keeping me under direct watch. When they both rose to grab some more supplies, Virgil shot me the faintest of grins. He's got me. He's got us. I wanted to scream, but it would have done no good. He was too experienced, too cold, too calculating. He'd planned out every possible outcome of this night, and no matter what we did, he'd always be one step ahead of us. His grin had completely gone and reverted back to a fake, sorrowful look when Donnie and Elle returned. Donnie stood up and walked off with me into the field. No, stop. Don't leave her alone with him. I wanted to say, but my voice wasn't strong enough. We were far out in the moonlit fields by the time Donnie stopped. I could still see the camp nearby, a flicker of fire in my sight. You need to tell me exactly what happened, said Donnie in a very serious tone. I could see him holding his handgun, and it scared me. Would my own brother really kill me? The thought was disquieting to say the least. Donnie, I swear on everything. Virgil is going to kill us. He murdered Bud. He tried to murder me. Check my feet. He tried to chop them off. Stop it, Tim. You're scaring me. He's going to kill Elle. Please listen to me. We can't leave them alone. You've got to believe me. I've known Bud since I was a boy, and that psychopath killed him, and then he... I paused. And then he ate him. Some of him. I wanted to say, but I couldn't find the words to say it. He what? It doesn't matter, but he needs to die. We need to go if it's not too late. Do you trust me? I trust you, he said. But how can I be sure you didn't just hit your head and saw things? You're asking me to kill someone in cold blood. Remember last night's dinner? Virgil never gave us any information that we didn't give him before. He never mentioned the name of any bars in town until I did, and he got our hometown's name from Bud all the way back in the parking lot. Do you remember? He paused for a brief moment before his skin grew pale and he shuddered. And I never saw a badge on him, Donnie said in horror. He never had any uniform, any badge, any ranger gear. I didn't even see a nameplate on his shirt. How could we have been so stupid? He was no ranger, and we could have seen that from the beginning. He pulled out a hunting knife and cut the ropes binding my hands. We bolted forward. He was holding my arm tightly as we began to turn back to camp. We hardly made it a few steps before we both recoiled in shock as we saw Virgil was standing right in front of us. So much so that we fell onto our bottoms. He towered over us, his walking stick in hand, which he was slowly opening to reveal his long, bloody blade. Clever boys, he said with a laugh. I knew eventually you'd figure it out, but I honestly didn't think it'd be this quick. Of all the people I've killed, you all put up the strongest resistance I've ever seen. I like that. He licked his lips, revealing his blood-stained pointy teeth. I like it when they kick and scream. I'm going to chop your hands and feet off first. You sick bastard. You're going to die tonight, said Donnie rather boldly. He did not hesitate to raise up his handgun and put a round into Virgil. Virgil whipped his steel down, but he was disoriented, so it merely cracked and broke some skin. Virgil shouted in pain, but before Donnie could shoot again, he jumped on top of him and started to bite. First, he sank his teeth into Donnie's shoulder, prompting a scream, but Donnie's jacket was made of tough material. There was a fierce struggle between the two, but eventually, it began to grow quieter. Fearing the worst, I reached around on the ground until I felt Virgil's blade. The wooden handle designed to look like a walking stick was still warm and smooth. He was still on top of my brother, choking him and biting him, trying to get a hold of the handgun. I walked over to them, my trembling hands grasping the blade tightly, almost choking it. With one cleave, I whipped the blade into the back of his neck. After the first chop, he immediately got up off Donnie and was on his knees, coughing up blood and sputtering, trying to scream. I was able to get one final look into his eyes. His eyes were begging me not to do it, but the words just could not escape his mouth. I struck him again, much harder this time, and in the front of his neck rather than behind. It wasn't like it was in the movies. The bones of his windpipe and neck cracked with a sickening crunch, and then the gash bled profusely, giving him a deep, red smile. His throat was open almost ear to ear. I was sure that he died with the second strike, but I wanted to make sure. He collapsed on the ground in a heap. I struck him again and again, until finally his neck was a mangled mess, and I was able to kick his head away. The grass around us was covered in a red mist, and poor Donnie was drenched as well. Looking back, it almost seems poetic, but at the time, I was horrified. Virgil was taken by the very blade he liked to use on his victims. Even with the first cut, he began to lurch up blood and scream. Maybe he was even begging for his life. I cannot say. Must have been such an alien concept to him. It was always someone else dying by his hand. But eventually, the killer became the killed. Looking back, I don't think he ever considered his own death as an option. But he got what he deserved. I don't think prison would have suited him. No prison could have held that psychopath. He'd have just kept harming and harming until they hanged him, and left him for the vultures to pick at. Donnie looked horrified at what I had done, but grateful as well. He coughed and pushed himself up after a few minutes. "I feel cold," he said, as he reached for his handgun. He crawled away from the body and tried to stand, but he couldn't. "Go find Elle. I'll be okay." I wasted no time running back to camp, dropping the blade by Virgil's body. Running into camp, I expected the worst, but I merely found Elle tied up in one of the tents, with broken glass littering the grass outside. Her shirt was somewhat torn, and her belt undone, but thankfully we made it back in time before Virgil could do something horrible to her. "Thank God you're here. That asshole hit me in the head with a beer bottle. Where's Donnie? Is he okay? Did you kill that psychopath?" "He's dead," I said, slicing her ropes open. I led her over to Donnie, and he was still recovering nearby. Elle took one look at Virgil's severed head and body, and then looked away. He was certainly dead. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth was in a permanent, bleeding scream from when I killed him. She looked as though she wanted to speak, but she could not. 3 of us limped back to camp. Donnie and Elle shot glances at each other as we all collapsed in a heap near our stuff. None of us were able to sleep for a while that night. We just sat slumped over our bags looking at each other, drenched in blood and covered with wounds. I worried that either Donnie or I wouldn't make it until the next morning. The sense of death was heavy in the air by the next morning, and with every breath that I drew, filled my nostrils. My shoulder stung like a hornet as I awoke, but with some help, we were able to tear everything down. I heard the roaring of an engine quickly approaching. It was a truck. A couple of game wardens and rangers came out of it that morning, likely smelling the scent of death and rot, as well as hearing gunshots. I clutched Donnie's handgun until I saw that they had legitimate badges and uniforms. "Good God," one of them said, eyeing Virgil's corpse. They made it down to our campsite. Their rifles were drawn. "What is the meaning of this?" the same one said. "You haven't done murder now, have you?" "Are you kidding me?" said Elle. "Forgive us," Donnie said with a cough. "That man tried to murder us. He's been killing hikers and hunters for a long time. He tried to kill us, but now we are rid of him." "Well, I'll be damned," said the lead ranger in a thick country accent, pulling off his hat to reveal a balding head of short graying hair. "We've been looking for that guy for a long time. I'm going to leave him out for the vultures and the worms. He doesn't deserve anything more than that. Hope you gave him the death that he deserved. I almost caught him once, 15 years ago. Makes me sick thinking about how many people I could have saved had I killed him then. I reckon he gave this area a bad name. Come on, let's get you folks to a hospital. This ain't good. The name's Johnson, by the way," he finished. The other rangers helped carry out our stuff into the truck. It must have been the sound of an engine that roused me. At Johnson's promise, we passed by Virgil's bloated and rotting body but ignored it, though Johnson did shove Virgil's own walking stick in the dirt and then planted his head on the blade, like a spike. He must have really hated this man, I thought to myself, and for good reason. Anyone who passed by would see his horror-struck face, a glimpse into how he died. A few vultures were already picking on his remains as soon as we left. The engine finally came to a halt as we reached the parking lot, which now had an ambulance parked in it. In another truck, Bud's mangled remains were brought out and put into a body bag. I couldn't even look at it. He was my friend. Now he was dead. I was carted off into the ambulance, but Donnie and Elle were deemed safe to drive. Donnie did so, as Elle's head was still shaken up from the blunt trauma. That night was the last time I ever saw Bud again. I never returned to the park either. Bud's father shot himself upon seeing his son's mangled remains, and his mother couldn't bear to lose both her husband and son, so She found her way up to a rope soon after. Donnie and Elle married, of course, and had children of their own. We moved out farther west, to the coast, but I chose to stay on the family ranch. Donnie is an old man now, and Elle an old woman, but I doubt they've forgotten this just as I haven't. After those events, my life went on a downward spiral. I started smoking and gambling, but I at least was able to save the farm and find a woman I could call my wife. She helped me so much, but the damage was done. It's been decades, and the tumors I brought upon myself from my smoking are slowly draining the life out of me. It's getting worse every day, but I needed to tell my story before I was gone. I hope that anyone else who made camp as I did acts more carefully and pays keener attention to small details. I could have saved more people had I known better. Only one thing remains certain to this very day. I encountered pure evil in the woods that night.